Well, hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. As always, we're here to keep you up to date with the latest news, tech, content and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, my co-host is a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome all the way from La France, 𝗓𝗏 Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much. You've just heard from a man who's also on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing Finance podcast and the host of the Roger video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards from Scotland.
Oh, Pascal, and this is episode 97. We are creeping ever closer to the magic 100 episodes. And today we've got a packed show as always. We've got lots of content to talk about, but we're also talking about a new film which had its premiere in London yesterday. And I was in London and I didn't even know this premiere was happening, Pascal.
Oh my goodness. Listen, we're going to talk about the marketing of Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. Now listen, when you and I launched this podcast 3 years ago, we wanted to do something a little, crazy, combining marketing from B2B, B2C, or people to people. We wanted to bring pop culture, gaming, tech, and we thought we might get away from time to time to bring the 80s in particular, our love for Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games, but no way did I even imagine that we would talk about a film that was started in 2021. We actually got the news that they were filming in Alnwick, not far from you and I at the time during the pandemic, and we'd been waiting nearly 2 years for this movie to be released.
Yeah, and I know very little about it. I mean, I obviously know what Dungeons and Dragons is. I played Dungeons and Dragons a lot back in the 80s, as you've said, but I know very little about the movie. So I'm going to be really interested to get into that. And I know you've done an absolute stack of research and uncovered some astonishing visuals for this film. So the film marketing section of today's show is going to be fantastic. But before we get to film marketing, we've got a lot of other ground to cover. So shall we start, as we always do, with In the News?
Days after the UK government banned TikTok on work phones, the BBC has urged staff to delete the Chinese-owned social media platform from corporate devices over privacy and security fears.
Diageo has launched a global campaign for rum brand Captain Morgan as it looks to make responsible drinking a social and cultural norm. Enjoy Slow features singer and rapper Bree Runway performing a slowed-down version of 1990s classic Rhythm of the Night.
I do like that song. John Lewis is exploring a potential move away from its 100% staff ownership model. In a bid to drive investment, the high street brand hopes to raise up to £2 billion by selling a minority stake in the business.
Leaders at 3UK have admitted the business is unsustainable without mergers to Vodafone as it's spending more than it's earning.
Well, Visit Britain and Visit England helped to boost visitor spend by £673 million between April 21 and June 22, thanks to dedicated marketing campaigns suggesting that international tourism is showing signs of continued strong recovery.
Greggs ranks as the strongest brand in the restaurant sector globally, according to Brand Finance.
Wow. Well, Jameson's new global campaign, Arrive Like a Local, in partnership with Irish Distillers, will be exclusive to global travel retail and is launching at over 35 airports.
And finally, the artificial intelligence company OpenAI has released GPT-4, its latest version of the AI system which powers ChatGPT, which made headlines when it was launched at the end of 2022. Now, Pascal, all of these news items are worthy of a lot of discussion. I actually had a lot of difficulty narrowing it down to three that I want to talk about. I mean, the John Lewis thing is fascinating because the staff ownership model is one thing that they're absolutely renowned for. They get so many plaudits from him, from people who review styles of employment and styles of company structure for the way that they've built their business, but we'll not dwell upon them today. I did want to talk about TikTok because it's a sort of Marmite thing, isn't it, this TikTok? And obviously there's all this potential hoo-ha of all the security breaches potentially, and the fact that it's Chinese owned, and is there some sort of Chinese conspiracy to harvest all the data of the people that are using it, etc., etc. I know that a lot of it has been banned from parts of the United States. I mean, I have to say, it doesn't seem to me stupid to say to government people, don't use TikTok on a work phone. I mean, when I was in big corporate, my work phone just had email and the sort of internal email system and website on it. That was it. They wouldn't let us put anything on. So I can understand why a government mobile probably shouldn't have TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, or anything on it, just in case. But what do you think? Is this really a problem, or is it just some conspiracy theory like any other conspiracy theory that we've heard over the last few years, some of which are utterly insane?
Well, I mean, to your point, I'm pretty sure I posted on LinkedIn earlier this week about, because I was the news was more like, I was thinking, well, looking back in my days in corporate, our IT policy was so stringent that would have never happened. People putting social media or apps without, getting checked by the IT department because of security. Because, I mean, literally, the combination mobile phone and social media app is just a perfect combination for crime to happen, from stealing your data to taking over. And when you work in government and when you work in corporate, it is known that there is a way for your phone to listen in, even if it is turned off.
Yeah.
I remember my younger brother was working for quite a famous food producer in France, and they were told to leave their phones at their desk if they went into a meeting room. And the meeting room had been actually designed to cut the noise because they had evidence that the competition could listen in.
Yeah.
So you begin with just that, and then add on to that, obviously, a foreign power who is not particularly, well known for their approach to privacy, to kind of, everything else that would come with it. Interestingly, at the time of recording, we're 24 hours after the CEO of TikTok having to address the US Senate and answering a number of questions. But what people are saying is, because of the position it is already essentially breaching data privacy and security. The questioning was actually very imbalanced. There was no attempt to learn about what really happens at TikTok and their link with the Chinese government. It was more, I have decided that you are essentially wrong, and let me therefore question you in a manner in which is going to confirm my current position. So it was very difficult for the general public to know by the end of the questioning whether or not TikTok is guilty of malpractice. It just knew that a bunch of people didn't like them very, very much. And then the defense from TikTok, and I have some sympathy, saying, well, why us and not YouTube or Facebook or Meta, for that matter, who have misbehaved in the past? So people are saying, is this some form of protectionism, to protect the interests of the US by essentially with false accusation? And the challenge, Roger, is that we will never know, because unless TikTok can reveal all, we'll never know. But on the basis that, because my memory is the IT policy that I had as a young employee, they were so stringent. That would have been a conversation. You would not have TikTok on your business phone.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, it does. I agree with you about the Senate thing. It does feel as if they're guilty until proven innocent, which is definitely not the way to do it. But then again, maybe they should have been a bit more open, as indeed, as you say, should have Meta and the others should have been a bit more open about some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Now, what do you think, Pascal, about Greggs ranking as the strongest brand in the restaurant sector? Now, I was actually quite flabbergasted when I read this, because I had just assumed that it would be something like McDonald's or Burger King or one of the other big American, food chains like Kentucky Fried Chicken or Wendy's or something like that. But good old-fashioned British Greggs. And yes, from anybody who's listening to the show who isn't from the UK, Greggs is pretty much on every single high street in the United Kingdom, and sometimes on every high street many times. And it's a sandwich shop, but you can buy pies, you can buy pasties, you can buy all sorts of food, and it's the sort of place that people will go to lunch. If they are working in an office, they'll go to Greggs. But I'd never classed it in the category of, a restaurant global brand. I just thought it was a British thing. But here we are, Greggs ranking as the biggest restaurant sector brand globally. Wow.
It's brilliant, isn't it? But actually, you've got to recognize that they have worked very hard and very cleverly on their brand for many, many years. So for me, that's the results of maybe decades, but certainly the last 10 years. If you think about the coup of being one of the catering brand for the 2012 Olympic Games, to be present at airport, which is probably the link there as well. And what I like about Greggs is they have essentially crafted the sandwiches. That they have a unique taste and they have a unique recipe. The bread is unique to theirs as well, because everything is done obviously in house, and the range of pie, which is leaning into sometimes regional culture and preferences. So they know who they are, and they have claimed that space, and they do an enormous amount of work with charities as well, breakfast clubs and the likes with schools. And I think, to me, that's just what it takes, so essentially they've become almost like an overnight sensation. It's taken them 20 years, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And they have some lovely little touches. And again, recently, I was reading an article on how Greggs works, and I didn't even know this, but when you actually learn about it, you realize it's absolutely beautiful. But they have this whole range of bakes and pies and everything. You can buy a steak bake, you can buy a chicken bake, there's a cheese and onion bake, meat pie, whatever you want. And each of their pies has a different pattern actually on the pastry. Yeah. And it means that the staff can recognize, because let's face it, a pie looks like a pie, doesn't it, unless you know. But the staff will know, well, that's a steak bake because it's got that pattern, that's a chicken bake because it's got that pattern. But of course, all the patterns look appealing and draw people in as well. So absolutely gorgeous piece of subliminal marketing going on there, which actually helps the staff be more efficient. I think it's fabulous. And finally, I did wonder whether to bring this one up, Pascal, but in the end I just had to. ChatGTP, my goodness, now they've released a more up-to-date version that's even cleverer. And the world seems to have gone ChatGTP crazy at the moment, or at least the marketing world has gone ChatGTP crazy at the moment. Every single article I read about these days is somebody coming up with a course on how to use ChatGTP, here are 5,000 prompts to make your use of ChatGTP better. There are people who, let's face it, 2 years ago they were NFT experts, last year they were metaverse experts, and now they're ChatGTP experts. Marketing people, we're embarrassing ourselves here. ChatGTP will have its uses, but you're setting the scene here for mediocrity. And all of these people who are ramming on about ChatGTP, you're talking yourself out of a job. You're creating a scenario where potentially, an agency conversation might be, imagine a corporate finds out that its agency is using ChatGTP. They'll say, well, why do we need the agency? By all means, we need to find a way of harnessing maybe the mundane tasks that this can take over. But for goodness sake, it seems to me that we're wishing away our creative ability to be human and to create human stuff and passing it over to this machine. Don't get so excited about it. Let's just tone down the hype a bit. Am I overreacting?
No, and I'm going to keep my reply very short because of my selection for this week's content spotlight. But ultimately, it is tiresome for you and I to observe, over the decades, our profession being essentially always summarized by a hack or a trick or a shortcut or a cheat, whether it's been SEO, whether it's social media, email marketing, particularly the digital stuff. And for me, you would not dream of having this conversation for things like legal services or HR or finance. I mean, you can imagine someone says to you, I'll do your tax return, but that won't be me. I'll ask an AI to do that for you. I'm going to build a case to defend yourself against basically an injustice done to you. I don't know what it is about marketing and sales in particular, whereby people literally, as you have observed over time, oh, look, I've got PowerPoint on my computer, therefore I'm going to start to present well. And this kind of strange link between access to technology that can accelerate the appearance of an output equal skills and intelligence. And I think to your point, and I've been talking about this and with others, by the way, about this idea of when you are part of the silent majority, are you also part of the problem? And do we need to be a bit more robust and be more vocal and warning people? Because one thing that is very tiresome as well is the targeting of adverts. So because you now do things like the show notes for Two Geeks and Martin podcast, now my feed on Instagram in particular and Facebook is full of idiots who are just moving their hands around, pointing to the part of the screen to list the top 10 AI solutions. Now, put it this way. I've gone ahead with the benefit of the doubt. So, okay, well, maybe there's something else. I've gone ahead and I tested someone's 10 recommended AI platforms, and they were all rubbish. I mean, to the point where it was not usable in the business context. It was maybe amusing in the social context, but not usable. And I've discovered little by little those individuals, the one that you are mentioning here today, they don't even use the AI platform that they talk about. So yeah, you're right. We need to start to be the voice of reason, warn people, but just say, and by the way, can I just also mention for you and I, the challenge is that we've been mentioning AI-powered solutions for at least since 2016, when Google did the demonstration of Google AI during Google I/O, more acronyms there. So it's also very hard for you now to be excited because we've known about it for 7 years now.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, we very rarely hear about NFTs anymore. And those people who were NFT experts 2 years ago, they went on to the metaverse. Let's face it, we very rarely hear about the metaverse anymore. And it seems that Facebook have realised what a complete arse they've made of that, and they've moved on. So I'm hoping that give it another 6 months to a year, and all these idiots that have jumped onto the ChatGTP bandwagon will also have moved on to whatever the next thing will come around. One thing I would just want to finish this section off in: please, everybody, if somebody comes along and tells you that they're an expert in something, check it out. You know, Pascal and I, without wanting to blow our own trumpets, and I don't think we'd blow our own trumpets enough, to be perfectly honest, Pascal, but we've been doing marketing for over 25 years. It takes a long time to become expert in something. ChatGTP launched towards the back end of 2022. We're only in the third month of 2023. It is not possible for somebody to be an expert in something that's only been around for a couple of months. It's lunacy to think that they can be experts in that sort of thing. And if they aren't experts, then there's got to be something going on, and they're probably trying to take advantage. So be wary of people who call themselves experts. Check out to find out whether they really are.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Roger.
So, with that little rant over, let's move on. Let's slow things down a little bit, and we'll move on to content spotlights. Well, in this part of the show, Pascal and I focus in on a piece of content that we found. It could be a video, it could be an article, it could be a podcast. So, Pascal, what have you got in the spotlight for us this week?
Well, as I ended a moment ago earlier, this is about AI. And this article written for Business Insider was written by 𝗧𝗵𝗲, probably one of our youngest content creator and journalists introduced on Content Spotlight. She recently got an award, actually, for her amazing work. And the article is as follows. Bill Gates just published a 7-page letter about AI and his predictions for its future. And two things I wanted to kind of highlight, because this news has been covered now by all platforms you can think of, and not just Business Insider. But hey, you know, there's nothing like being the first out of the gate. So point of view of speed of execution, that's number one for Grace. But also she was able to compile a summary that felt that was really in her own true voice. So, you know, let's continue how we began. I'm seeing now evidence that people are using ChatGPT and all the others, and this simple copy and paste job here. And I've got nothing against research, but you need to write in your own voice, and Grace is doing that. So she's doing an amazing job to summarize 7-page document by probably one of the most famous and influential individual in the world of tech and online communication, which means that her article is interesting in its own right. And of course, she closes with a link to the full version where you can go on Bill Gates' official website. So my comment, because we always look for ways in which we can be inspired by others and learn, is in your industry, viewers and listeners, there will be essentially those figures who were there at the very, very start. And I think, to the point that you made earlier, Roger, I'd rather listen to what Bill Gates has to say than someone who discovered AI and had to be essentially good on a keyboard a few months ago, because what you need is a sense of history. You need to know where you've come from to know where this is going, which is why you and I like to do This Week in History in particular. So when we look at the article written by Grace, she reminds all of us, of course, about who Bill Gates is, and talks about this idea of what is written is called "The Age of AI Has Begun." And then she goes into summarizing the key elements of the article. So Bill Gates kind of business case, if you will, for using AI is still about productivity, which was a business case 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when he began in the 70s and the 80s. And he believed that this is all about improving global inequities. So what he's warning about very, very quickly is that this is maybe once and for all our chance as a global society to close the gap between the have-nots point of view of access to knowledge and information. And he's warning that, sadly, because of the history of market forces, we're going to put the situation where there would be very, very clever, very useful, even life-saving AI solutions that would be only accessible by those who have the money or the means to access it. And I think this is a kind of call to arms, a rallying call from Bill Gates about all the big platforms to try and find a way to make sure this is happening well. He's talking about productivity in the workplace, in healthcare, and in education. And his contention would be that this is really what we should be aspiring to, which is every single person in the world, no matter who they are, no matter their wealth, will have access to a digital personal assistant that can accelerate, obviously, the tasking of things, but access to information, including health. So you kind of read this summary, and what she's done, therefore, is really move away from the white noise of I've spoken about, which makes actually in its own right fascinating to want to read the 7-page document. So I'm not going to say any more than that, because I want people to read, obviously, her article, Grace May, but also the 7-page document. For me, it takes me back to something that we mentioned on This Week in History, which was the facts that Bill Gates wrote in '95 about the internet. And this almost urban legend now, where allegedly he was back of his car using one of the early laptops, and he typed essentially, I think it was called the tidal wave of the internet. He was telling his colleagues, we need to be embracing this, but in the right way. So I'm just going to close very, very quickly with, I suppose, words from Bill Gates himself, taken from the 7-page document, where he says, "I'm lucky to have been involved with the PC revolution and the internet revolution. I am just as excited about this moment. This new technology can help people everywhere improve their lives. At the same time, the world needs to establish the rules of the road so that any downsides of artificial intelligence are far outweighed by its benefits, and so that everyone can enjoy these benefits no matter where they live or how much money they have. The age of AI is filled with opportunities and responsibilities."
I mean, that sounds like wisdom, doesn't it?
That's what you want. You want wisdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, I quite like, I mean, the theme that struck me there is that what he's saying is that, yes, let's use AI to remove the sort of repetitive and boring tasks that, let's face it, blight a lot of people's lives, to free them up to be more creative. But what I'm seeing happening at the moment is that people seem to be wanting to use AI to stifle creativity, or even to sweep creativity aside. And that's not the right direction for us to go in. But I'm not going to have another rant about AI, Pascal, other than to say, I think Bill Gates has had a bad press over the last few years. All these utterly insane conspiracy theories about, the vaccine being about injecting nanobots into people, and Bill Gates has got some sort of conspiracy theory to take over the world. I mean, for goodness sake, I was reading one the other day where this woman has been for her COVID vaccination, and afterwards she said she was rubbing the spot where the injection had taken place, and she felt a bit of a lump. Now, let's face it, we all get a bit of a lump after we have a injection. And she squeezed this lump, and eventually this little device came out, and she published a photograph of herself with this thing in the palm of her hand. And if you actually zoom in it's one of those things that you have in a bicycle tire, the bit where you actually put the bicycle pump in to blow the tire up. I think, what are you doing? This is insane, but people believe this stuff. It's absolutely mad. So Bill Gates, it's like I said, he's been around a long time. He is an expert in these sort of things, and his predictions are often very, very well thought out and often very accurate. So let's start listening to real experts rather than the experts that were born in the last 3 months. So Pascal, let me talk to you this week about public speaking. I came across this article in the Entrepreneur magazine. It's called "Remember These 7 Public Speaking Basics When Presenting Overseas" by a gentleman called Joseph Liu. Now, I did read that the headline was what grabbed me on this. And I read the article and thought, I'm not sure I'm going to do this as a content spotlight. And then the penny dropped and I thought, oh, actually, yes, I am going to do this. Now, obviously, before the pandemic, my speaking career had taken me abroad quite often, and particularly to Eastern Europe. I'd spent quite a lot of time in companies like Montenegro, North Macedonia, the Czech Republic, Serbia, Romania, crikey, when I start reeling off, it was quite a little trip. And obviously, when you go and speak in a different country, you've got to take into consideration that there will be cultural differences. Not only the fact that they don't speak English as their main language can often be an issue. I remember the first time I went to Montenegro, I was sat on the aeroplane. In fact, this is in the introduction of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans. It had such a profound effect on me. I was sat on the plane thinking, what on earth are you doing? Flying to a country where English isn't their first language to talk about marketing. And I got really quite imposter syndromed out by this. And of course, when I arrived and I had this massively warm welcome from the folks in Montenegro, the speech went well. I actually found out that most of them could speak English better than me. It didn't matter, but on the way, I think there's all these things you've got to take into consideration. So that's why I decided to dig a little bit deeper into this article. And then I came to a pretty sort of penny drop solution. So basically he's saying that, if you go and speak abroad, you're going to have to think about all sorts of different things culturally. So it's no surprise to find that the first of his tips is know your audience. And again, that's where you've got to take into consideration the culture. It's not only the language, as I've said, and what you should also do, and I found this out when I went to Montenegro and North Macedonia, is are they using a sort of translation service where the audience can have headphones or something so that it translates into their language as you speak? That might be important. Should you learn some of your speech in the local language? Now if I was to come and do a seminar in France, I could probably speak a little bit of French. I did do French A-level a long time ago, and I can sort of understand quite a bit of French if it's said to me. I find it harder to actually speak it back. But there are some languages, like Chinese and Japanese, which is phonetically a lot harder to grasp, and you might struggle to do that. But it's something to think about. So know your audience, and how do you need to adapt your presentation for the vagaries of that particular audience? Then the second one, obviously, arrive as early as possible. And again, this is, if you're traveling abroad, you've got to factor in jet lag, you've got to factor in time zones, you've got to factor in the fact that the plane might be late. So don't leave it to arrive on the morning of your presentation. For goodness sake, arrive a day or two earlier. If you're traveling a long way, if you're going through various time zones, maybe arrive a couple of days before so that you've got a chance to get over the jet lag before the presentation happens. Or at least arrive a couple of days and spend some time getting to know the culture of the city that you're presenting in, learning a bit about it. I mean, wouldn't it be great if you did that and you were able to inject a few comments about what you've seen into your presentation. So that's worth thinking about. A lot of people, again, I get on a train, I'll arrive, I'll do the presentation, and then I'll get back on a train or a plane and I'm disappearing. Give yourself the time. And the next couple, again, were just a little bit obvious to me, and I thought, well, this is possibly one of the reasons why I wouldn't focus in this as a content spotlight. Like, do your best to adapt. Things might go wrong on the day. The tech might not work. It's a different country. Sometimes different countries have different power supplies, don't they? The difference between 50 hertz and 60 hertz can sometimes mess up a presentation. You've got to be careful. Sometimes countries have different customs around drinking events and things like that. The fourth one he talks about is taking feedback on board. Now, if you do a presentation in the United Kingdom, have you ever, I'm sure Pascal, like me, you found this when you say, has anybody got any questions, anybody got any feedback, and the audience just sits there, no hands go up. Part of that is that as a culture, people in the UK are a little bit reticent to putting their hands up at an event, and they're very unlikely. They might come to speak to you afterwards and give you some feedback or ask you a question afterwards, but sometimes people are a little bit reticent to do that. But in some countries, if you say, has anybody got any questions, you might get 100 hands go up, and then you've ruined your presentation because you've then got to spend an inordinate amount of time catering for the fact that you've asked that. So you've got to adapt. And there are other things about culture, like always being gracious and sometimes standing your ground as well, because some cultural differences can make you feel a little bit intimidated. But when I got to the end of this, the seventh one was just believe in yourself. I just thought, actually, the heading of this article is 7 tips for presentations when you're overseas. Remember these 7 public speaking basics when presenting overseas. But my conclusion is, and it was a penny drop moment, and that's why I decided to include this article, and it's well worth reading. You would do this whether you were presenting in your own country or overseas. It's the absolute basics, a lot of this. I mean, number 1, know your audience. You don't only find out about your audience if you're presenting overseas. If I'm presenting down the road in Musselburgh, I'll find out about the audience. If I'm presenting down in London, I'll find out about the audience. This is basic stuff. So what I came to the conclusion is, read this article, not from the point of view it tells you what to do if you're traveling abroad, but basically it tells you what the absolute fundamental presentation 101 things are that you do before you even open PowerPoint.
Yeah, and as listening to you and reflecting on the title and traveling and all those things, like inviting the theatre of the mind, I think this is a warning about complacency, and this is a warning about essentially on occasion being overconfident. And I think 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was saying, just because, for example, you are a UK public speaker and you do this in the UK, doesn't mean you can circumvent the list of things you've said. So for me, it's also part of that. But as I'm listening to you, the other message that I've explored on occasion in other segments is, I don't think that currently there's enough exchange of information and dialogue between the guest speaker and the organizers. I mean, I see for myself, sometimes how hard it is to actually get someone to even just give me some time on Zoom or another, so I can ask them questions, such as at least from Joseph as well as a few others. So it's a warning to both, I think, the organizers and the speakers, because conversely, if you're the organizer and you have speakers as you were coming from overseas, should you provide more information? Because, of course, you'll be making assumptions as well based on how comfortable your local speakers are. I mean, for me, I remember actually one presentation where it was somebody that came from the US to the UK, and as we say, we are separated by a common language. And it was a wonderful way. He opened the presentation with a picture of himself inside a pub, confused by the sheer choice and selection of beers, and basically, I suspect, the day before, made up the opening story that he would not potentially use with a US audience. So back to what you're saying about arrive a little earlier if you can, and see what you can do to absorb some of the local culture. But there's nothing like, a fish out of water story, but a hero's journey on how you still present with confidence, and at the end you can have a standing ovation.
Absolutely right. No, all really good lessons for us to learn. Okay, Pascal, let's move on. And this is, I know, one of your favorite parts of the show. This is where we have a look at marketing tech and apps. And in this part of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table marketing tech that's grabbed our attention over the last week and can make our lives as marketers easier and more creative. So, Pascal, tell us about your tech.
Okay, so I've got two options, which is all to do with getting more value from your social media activities. Number one is actually from a scenario, something that happened to myself and my clients last week. We were putting together a proposal for them to win a big contract. And I know the suggestion would be good to have as almost an appendix, testimonials and kind of thank you messages and kind of all sort of positive reviews from social media. I didn't realize that then I'd created so much work for the team because, unfortunately, I'd forgot to ask whether or not they kept a record of those things. So what then followed, Roger, was them spending hours and hours going through Twitter and scrolling down and through LinkedIn and through Facebook to find those positive messages. And I said, do you know what? There's going to be a better way. I mean, you can do it, the kind of DIY way of screenshotting the positive messages, but then you're stuck, I suppose, if you want to prove that it's a real message because you don't have necessarily the URL and so on. And I remember that I had come across a solution. It took me a while, but I was determined to find it. And there is a solution called 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which has been developed by 𝗓𝗏, hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And this is essentially a system. You open an account, you have a free plan, which you can allow you to try out, and then you can pay for more facilities where you can literally copy and paste URLs of those well-done messages and thank yous and testimonials and reviews. So you have a record, a centralized record of all those tweets and Facebook posts and LinkedIn messages and so on in one central place so that you can use them to then carry over to a proposal, or even better, you can use the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 kind of code and embed those on your website. You can have access to different styles, from the grid layout, from carousel to the normal wall that we know before. You can even adjust some of the design to give it a star rating or that kind of, quote marks type of design. And it's something that was invented really by 𝗓𝗏 because he needed a solution. He went around the interweb, couldn't find anything that he liked, so he went ahead and did it himself, and now making it available to all of us. So if you are out there, in a receipt, I'm sure you are, all of you, of well-done messages and thank yous, save them because you'll need them as part of your social proofing. And then you've got the other side, which was essentially either proving to others that your social media activities are doing well, or sometimes just to understand, so, which accounts do we have and how well is it doing, and just maybe having a bit of a overview statement. And again, you can do it manually for sure, but why don't you use something like 𝗧𝗏𝗏 Charts, 𝗧𝗏𝗏charts.com, and essentially it's using AI, but the right way, to produce very simple, very light in design, very easy to follow by non-marketers, dashboard reports on your social media activities. You can link essentially your MailChimp, your active campaigns, so that's the email. You can link your Facebook, even the adverts. You can link your LinkedIn company page, comment for them to link the personal page. You can link your Twitter, your Instagram, your YouTube to essentially either PowerPoint, Google Slide, even PDF, and you have essentially this great looking, elegant dashboard that can give you a snapshot view of, sometime once a year you want to know about the follower count or the reach or the engagement, or you want to go granular and look monthly. And currently people put together things into Excel and then they try and force their way into maybe something like Canva or another. And this will essentially do it for you automatically.
This is really good stuff, isn't it? And I love the first one because I've always tried to keep I mean, it's just a Word document that I just copy and paste positive stuff into. Because let's face it, if somebody makes a negative comment about something that we do, or a critical comment, we always agonize about that particular comment, don't we? And we often forget about all the great comments that we've had. Almost to the exclusion of the negative ones. So it's always good to have these positive things in place so that you can review them if you are feeling a bit down about your business, or you're feeling a bit got at by a negative comment. So I really like these ideas. This week I wanted to talk about research, Pascal. And this was prompted very, very briefly by the show The Apprentice, and I even did a very quick 5 minutes on my own podcast about this. But an episode of the Apprentice recently just reinforced to me the importance of research. And we said it just before in the Content Spotlight: knowing your audience before you go and do a speech. Learn about your audience, whichever country they might be in. And I just realized that one of the reasons why the people on the Apprentice TV show fail so often is they're not given the opportunity in the structure of the show to research the audience that they're tasked to go away and create a product for. And it just made me realize these days we don't hear people talking about research half as much as we should do. And again, I just wonder whether that's one of the reasons why so many campaigns fail, or why so many products fail, because people aren't putting the importance on research. Now, of course, research can happen at the very start of a product development cycle, or the very start of a marketing campaign, but also you can make sure that research goes on during the rollout, and you'll refine your product, and you'll refine your process, and you'll refine your campaign as time goes on. And it just prompted me to start having a look at some of the cost-effective methods that you can undertake research. Now, funnily enough, I'm involved in a conference at the moment which is putting together a research platform to look at the retirement market in the United Kingdom, and it's looking like the budget for those questions being sent out to an audience of between 5 and 10,000 could run into 40 to 50 grand of cost. So research isn't cheap, which is possibly one of the reasons why smaller businesses don't do it. But there are ways to do it. And these two platforms are well worth having a look at. Everybody will have heard of the first one, SurveyMonkey. It's been around for as long as I can remember. It's still one of the best. It's still one of the most cost effective. It now has so many more features than it had the last time I looked at it. And the last time I looked at it was probably only about 18 months ago, but it's got more and more features. And as its name would suggest, you can create research surveys, you can create questionnaires. Those surveys could be about new products. They could be about, somebody's visited your restaurant and it's just a survey to ask them to fill in to find out what they've thought. I went on a train to London yesterday. I got an email from LNER afterwards asking me what I thought about the experience. It could well be that that survey was powered by something like SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey will give you the flexibility and the power to create those sorts of surveys, so it's well worth having a look at. But then one completely left of field that I came across is called Video Ask. Now, it's a bit like SurveyMonkey, but they've tried to weave video into it so that it looks as if you're actually having a proper conversation with an actual person rather than just filling in a form. And I had a look at the website and I actually like what I see. It did remind me of something else that we've reviewed on the show before called Loom, where you actually use videos to send people like a 90-second video if you want to ask them a question or something like that. But this is all more about survey. So it's got some of the flexibility and some of the style of SurveyMonkey, but there's a much more focus on using video to engage people, and I'm all for that engagement. Now, I think it's possibly harder to do because if you start asking people questions and you use videos, you maybe start having to create videos depending upon what the answers might be, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. But as a platform, I liked what I saw. So what I thought would be quite interesting was Just tell us what your favourite research platforms are. I'm sure everybody who's listening to the show or watching the show will have heard of, will have used, or are using SurveyMonkey. It's just there, isn't it? But Video Ask is a new way of doing things, and it intrigues me. And I'd love to know anybody out there who's been using it successfully. Just give us your feedback. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, because I was quite intrigued by what I saw.
Oh, thank you very much. I was reflecting on what you were saying. It may well be that I would agree with you, the lack of effort and budgeting in terms of time and money in research. Is it because actually people are under the impression that they know enough about the audience, because they're on social media and they have this feeling of, well, we're connected, we know what's going on just because of the reaction, likes and comments on social media, but that's not enough to allow you to make an informed decision about the evolution of your product design and your marketing. And for me, we need to also accept, to your point about SurveyMonkey has been around that online surveys have been around for a very long time. So what will be your version? What you're going to do in terms of an experience, particularly for the before? Should you make it more like an exclusive club where you are invited, invitation only surveying? But also for me, the real turnoff is the automation throughout. So you get an email, you click on the link, you fill the survey, you get an automated reply, well done, thank you. You don't hear that there's a lack of, you need to humanize, I think, the whole survey experience for people to want to do it, I reckon.
Yeah, no, it's good. And again, it goes back to the article I did as Content Spotlight in the last episode. One of the mistakes marketers make is almost superimposing their own views over what they think their customers want. So if I like red cars, I'll just assume everybody likes red cars, but they probably don't. But because I like red cars, I can make the mistake of assuming that everybody does. So Pascal, this is the time in the show where we fire up the flux capacitor, we set the controls of the TARDIS, and we head back in time. Should we do This Week in History?
And in 1905, the radio fax is patented in the US by Cornelius Ehret of Rosemont, what a wonderful name, who called his invention a system for transmitting intelligence. However, faxing did not become a practical mode of communication until the 1920s.
In 1930, the Turkish cities Constantinople and Angora changed their names to Istanbul and Ankara.
Wow. And in 1988, Beetlejuice, the fantasy horror comedy film directed by Tim Burton, opens in the US. The movie eventually grossed $75 million in North America for an initial budget of $15 million.
Wow. And in 1989, Pixar wins an Academy Award for Tin Toy, the first entirely computer animated work to win in the Best Animated Short Film category.
Wow.
So, Pascal, have you ever been to Turkey?
I have. I've had the pleasure of working for a Turkish tour operator. My younger days as a marketing officer, and went to Istanbul 3 times, I think, for work.
Wow. Now, I've never been to Turkey. It's one of those countries that fascinates me. I don't know why I've never been. It's definitely on the list. And Istanbul itself, again, has always fascinated me. Such a bustling but beautiful city, and obviously the Bosphorus, I think, goes through the centre of that huge river. Now it's iconic in so many different ways, and it's appeared in so many different films as well. Funnily enough, we just watched From Russia with Love this week, the second James Bond film, which is predominantly set in Istanbul, and that film is nearly 60 years old, Pascal. And yet the cinematography and the city looks absolutely stunning, even in that film. I think they could do with maybe remastering the print, to be perfectly honest, of the version that we've got, but it absolutely looks gorgeous. And it just ignited that thought in my head of the change of the name from Constantinople to Istanbul, because I actually thought Constantinople was the phenomenal name for a city. I mean, if you had a city called Constantinople, why on earth would you want to change it? It's just one of the most amazing names ever. But I imagine there's some sort of cultural reason, Emperor Constantine, etc., etc. You might know a bit more about that than I do. But I just think that this part of the world is iconic in so many different ways, a centre of trade, a centre of culture. So many films have been shot there. And there's also a famous song about this as well, isn't there? Istanbul, no Constantinople, no, it's Istanbul. I don't know, maybe I've made that up. But what's your take on Constantinople becoming Istanbul, having been that travel person?
You're asking someone's going to be very biased because I had wonderful trips to Istanbul. And you know what is interesting about, so I was working with Turkish Tour Project, I was working closely with the Turkish Stories Board as well. So I can thank them because that's when I got into video production as well. That's when I went into PR, escorting journalists to Istanbul to write reviews in newspapers and so on. And one thing I loved about the Turkish Stories Board in Istanbul, that the marketing was spot on in so much as it was truthful. So everything you hear and everything people have told you about Istanbul is correct. It is that beautiful. It is that essentially enthralling. And there is no kind of exaggeration. It's not bloated on purpose to get you there, which I think is just amazing. The Blue Mosque is, the market is. You've got to get up in the morning to see the sunrise and stay in for the sunset and so on. You've got to experience that and the wonderful culture. But the reason why it's fascinating, because I'd forgotten about Ankara being Angora previously, but the one about Istanbul I knew. And what is interesting when you talk to the locals and so on, for them it was a desire to move away from the past. So because Constantinople was linked to the Emperor Constantine and with all the historical thing that comes with it, there was a desire for Turkey as a society to move on with the times. And you will know, of course, of one of the many kind of figures. Kemal Atatürk did a lot of things. Decision, for example, to adopt, the alphabet and known to us, to adopt different currencies and so on, so that they could trade with the world. But what is fascinating that Istanbul came actually from the local population and their own kind of vernacular and way to name the city. So what I love about it in the context of a marketing podcast is that the audience basically led, the authorities to reach a conclusion that Istanbul, or Istanbul, as it was called more locally at the time, was a good move. But it was inspired by essentially the population using the term more than anything more scientific than that, which is what I think is wonderful.
Wow. And when I put together the second news item for this one, for me, the Pixar winning an Academy Award for Tin Toy, I actually misread the news item first, and my brain didn't see Tin Toy. My brain saw Toy Story, and I think I actually had a double take when I went and read it again, because I'd thought, oh, of course they won the Academy Award for Toy Story, and that was the first entirely animated film. But of course, I was wrong. Tell me about Tin Toy.
Yeah, no. So what is fascinating is that's what can happen when people forget about the past and the sense of where have you come from, so we know where you're going. And therefore, before you could get to the point where Toy Story could be produced and you get the financiers behind you. By the way, quick shout out to Roger and I. We review the marketing of Toy Story. In one of the previous episodes, you've got to have prototypes. You have to try things out. You've got to hone your skill. And short form, to me, is logical, but it seems to be also logical in the world of film production. So Tin Toy was a proof of concept, really.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely convinced that the creator would have been happy with just being nominated, but to win the award, then you can use that. So I can link him back to what I was saying about testimonials and reviews and so on. So you've got to use that as now your calling card to say, well, what else could we do now? Where else can we take it? But you have to be patient, because 89 and 95, that's 6 years though, before you can come back and present to the world essentially the fully realized vision and to be essentially a brand that everybody knows around the world.
No, that's a really good lesson. And again, one of the main reasons why we do This Week in History, because we do owe a massive debt to all this work that went on in the past that allows us to benefit from all the things that we have here in the present. Okay, Pascal, let's move on. We've got some creators to shout out. Okay, Pascal, who are you giving a shout out to this week?
Now, listen, you know I love new beginnings. I'm a big romantic at heart when it comes to content creation. So it gives me immense pleasure to give Mark Orr and Dan Wilkinson a well-deserved shout-out. Both video producers and video consultants. They are also the co-hosts of a brand new live video series, Livestream Rebels. I think maybe there's some Star Wars connotation here. I need to check with them in the very, very near future. So what is really interesting about all of this, and the reason why we have this segment, is because we're looking for inspiration, not just in terms of the activity of producing content, but finding your voice, finding your style. This is what we need to do. And what is really interesting about Mark and Dan is that, yes, they are live streaming consultants and producers that can help you with your event. Yes, they know things, but what they've chosen to do is not to share with you what you should do to get with live stream, but they're going to show you what they have done and how they do it. And therefore, they tell you the full story from start to finish. And in episode 1, and I put the link in the show notes, they share not only, of course, their passion and wisdom when it comes to live streaming, but they share the story of a recent NHS conference from start to finish. So literally the setup, what they had to do, some of the, they had to deal, for example, with an unexpected event, such as a speaker couldn't make it because of transport issues, and they had to literally on the day turn it to a more of a hybrid event and so on, and using their skills. There'd be no ChatGPT prompts for that, I tell you right now. And it was an absolute pleasure to listen to expert calmly, simply talk about not just what you should do, but also let's show you how we've done it, and perhaps you can learn from us. And the other thing as well that was important when Mark kind of opened the live stream, he was talking about, this is not going to be perfect. This is our first one. We're going to discover, how we're going to go with this show. So there's an element of sincerity, but they were saying, we didn't want to wait for perfection. We just thought this information is important to you, to others, and that's what we have to do. So I think it's also a very, very strong message. So Marco and Dan Wilkinson, the very best of luck with Livestream Rebels.
Fantastic. Yeah, good. I remember I've met Mark a few times at various Newcastle events. I'm not sure I've met Dan before, but yeah, absolutely great. Well done and good luck with that. My shout out is actually the second time I've shouted out this person, but 𝗖cie heç𝗁𝗲 is a lady that I met, funnily enough, in Montenegro. We were talking about that earlier on. She posted something on LinkedIn and tagged me into it, and it was another of those sort of mic drop moments for me, the sort of epiphany moments. But basically, 𝗖cie told this story about how recently she'd been talking to somebody. I think it was potentially about a speech at a conference. And she was told by somebody that she was getting too old to talk about tech. She was getting too old to be seen as somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to tech. Now, actually, 𝗖cie has been an ambassador for companies like 𝗬𝗏𝗴 in the past, so she does know her tech. But she was obviously taken a bit aback by this, and she tagged me and many other of her friends into this post to say, have you had a similar experience? And I think we pretty much all have. I'm sure you have as well. I've had it suggested to me recently, oh, you're getting too old to be talking about this. And I think that you have to stop and think, and there's a bit of weaving in some of the things we said earlier on in here, that it takes a long time to build expertise. You can't build expertise in a few months. It takes time. And with age does come that wisdom that we talked about before with the likes of Bill Gates, and the experience to get wisdom does take its time. And I answered 𝗖icie's post by saying, I'm actually a Gen X in terms of generation. And if you look at the standard profile of a Gen X is a little bit tech phobic. Indeed, you resist new technology, which is completely opposite to what I've been. I've always loved new technology. I was playing on the science teacher's research machines 𝗓𝗏𝗔𝗧 at school when I was, and staying behind after school to play on this computer because I loved it so much. I've always embraced new stuff like social media, tech, and the apps and all of this sort of thing, videos and all of this. We've shared a lot of these experiences together, Pascal, and I realized that the reason is that I've always been curious. I've been curious about computers. I've been curious about new apps. I've been curious about video and how it works. I've been curious about storytelling, and I've always asked questions, and I've always wanted to know the answers. And the conclusion I put into my reply to Elise was that if you're curious, then you can become an expert in something, because that natural curiosity will lead you to become an expert, will lead you to be able to find things out. And I don't believe that you can ever grow out of being curious. You'll never be too old to be curious. And if you remain curious, then these people that say you're too old to talk about technology, you're too old to talk about marketing, it's all bullshit. The curiosity is what gives you the authority to talk about that. So Elise, you have really given me I'm going to write an article about this eventually, and you'll get full credit for making me think about this, but it's curiosity that gives you the authority. Do you agree?
Oh, completely. Yeah. And what an outrageous comment to make to anyone. Very, very quickly, in one of my kind of public addresses, I have a moment at the very, very start, because you and I now are reaching the point where we've taken an audience, which is almost, can be across 3 generations now, literally. So I had this fun moment where I've got this slide which has an animation saying the 80s were the best, with some kind of really corny 80s music. And I ask anybody that was around the 80s to stand up. So they do whilst the music is playing. When the chaos kind of, it comes down a bit, people who are sat down clearly are, well, very young people. And I addressed them that said, look around the room, because thanks to us, I put myself in that, you're in a position to do what you're doing on TikTok. So what do you have to say? So they, they play the game along and they say thank you. And then I turn to people who are in the 80s. The message to the younger people is don't mess it up, because I think that's also why people share this outrageous comment to Elise, which is they have no sense of history. And of course, you're not going to claim that the 80s were the best.
Absolutely right. All that fabulous music, hairstyles, and shoulder pads. Great stuff. So let's move on, Pascal. I've been waiting for this all the way through the recording. It's finally time for us to talk about this week's film. Let's move on to film marketing. Well, this week we're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Just had its premiere in London yesterday, the day before recording episode 97 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Let's have a look at the trailer.
What is that?
We're facing the greatest evil the world has ever known.
She's executing our people.
This is unlike anything we've ever seen.
What's trying to kill us this time?
Pretty much everything.
The magic is on a whole other level.
We're outmatched. How are we gonna defeat them?
I know what to do. I can ask corpses 5 questions and then they go back to being dead.
𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Were you killed in battle?
Yes.
Great. 4 more questions, right?
Yes.
No. That wasn't for you. Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it. Only answer when I talk to you, okay?
Yes.
Why did you say okay at the end of that?
I didn't.
Fantastic. Where's the shovel?
Oh, Pascal. Talking about the 1980s, I spent so much time in the 1980s playing Dungeons and Dragons, one of the original, if not the original, role-playing games. You know, all of those dice that we used to have, 2-sided dice, 10-sided dice, 20-sided dice, good old-fashioned 6-sided dice, D6, we used to call it D6 and D20 and all of that sort of thing, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, and all of those scenarios. And we would spend hours and hours and hours and hours in people's living rooms or in people's bedrooms or sat around people's dining room tables playing Dungeons and Dragons. And here we have a film. Now, I know very little about this film. You've chosen it. And I know you're going to be, I know you're as excited as I am, but I know very little about the film. Now, I have a preconceived idea in my head as to if I was to make a film about Dungeons and Dragons, because my experience of Dungeons and Dragons is that it's a game that we played, and in playing it, we create this fantasy world of orcs and hobbits and wizards and all of that sort of thing. In my head, a film about Dungeons and Dragons would require the film to start off with normal people like you and I sat around a dining room table playing this game and then getting sucked in somehow. Is that what we're going to see, or is it more like we're just going to get thrown straight into a Lord of the Rings style world?
The latter, and happily so. You know, what others have called the Jumanji curse, because I think it's asking too much of an audience to be into different worlds, and because we have so much to cover in marketing, I'm going to keep my answers very, very short. But what I will say is, so you and I have heard about the movie being in production, as I mentioned, when we began the recording this episode, since the summer 2021. In the middle of the pandemic, you and I saw news. Well, two things were happening. Closer to you, in Barbara Castle, they were filming the next Indiana Jones movie.
Yep.
And further south, closer to me, in Annie Castle, they were filming Dungeons and Dragons. And I nearly fell off my chair. But then, since then, I've spent pretty much the last 2 years torn between anguish at a disaster of a movie and, of course, you know, the real desire to have a wonderful time, because Dungeons and Dragons is an adventure movie whereby my memory is laughing and laughing and laughing with my friends, because ultimately it's all about solving riddles. It's all about, you know, a heist into a dungeon or a cave where you make the best laid plans, but of course at the roll of a d20 everything can go very, very wrong, and then chaos ensues. And so I was thinking, well, are we going to have, sadly, like, there's been 3 attempts to date at making official Dungeons and Dragons movies, and they've not been particularly successful because essentially people don't know about them. And the reason for that is they are far, far too serious. And the experience of playing the game, whether it's family, friends, and that kind of things, is literally a truly joyous moment when you immerse yourself in the world of storytelling, a world of fantasy, of course, and you can enact, you know, the characters you've chosen to do and so on. And it's been around as part of popular culture since the mid-70s. It peaked in the early 80s, which is where you and I picked it up, really, edition 2, and has carried on ever since. It's on the 6th edition now as a game. But of course, role-playing games will exist for all franchises, including James Bond. You can be a werewolf fighting vampires. You can do anything that essentially your imagination would allow you to do. So filmmaking should be a good kind of medium for that. But to date, it's never worked. Perhaps this is the one.
Perhaps this is the one. Now, I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, I'm just thinking back now, and it was making me smile. There are a number of occasions I remember playing D&D or RuneQuest or something like that, which was similar, where we were absolutely wetting ourselves with hysteria. I remember there was one time, and I can't even remember what had happened and what the joke was or what somebody did. Something funny happened as a result of a dice being thrown. And I was quite literally doubled up in pain because I was laughing so much. We were, and yeah, if those original iterations of the film failed because they didn't embrace the humor, then hopefully that is why this film might succeed, because I know from the trailer and also from the reviews that I've read so far that the humor is there.
The humor is there, and the feedback has been absolutely amazing, much to my relief. So I think for me, from a marketing point of view, they had a very, very interesting challenge. They had to, on one hand, appease D&D fans like you and I, but they had to then appeal to non-gamers, people who, just essentially didn't really engage with that particular leisure activity. And easier said than done, I reckon, and I can't wait to study with you what they've been up to. So because of course of the gift of the internet, we were able to access a lot of information. I felt like I was holding literally a bag of holdings for all D&D players, where I kept putting my hand in, and each time I could retrieve some amazing information. So we're very lucky because it just started, so we have access to official websites. Yay. I was able to compare the US international website to the UK to the French one. Interestingly, all websites seem to be managed and created by a company called 𝗏 based in London and Los Angeles, and this looks to me like a UK company. So perhaps not to you and I to maybe invite them one day to talk about what it takes. And then you had, of course, all the social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and the occasional Snapchat as well. So because of the sheer volume of information, I gave myself the brief to only, sadly, because of time constraint, look at the international campaign of Dungeons & Dragons. We may on occasion make references, we've done with the premiere in London, of what's been happening in all the past. But just as a learning point with regard to this campaign, all three websites had a different look and feel, interestingly, even though the platform was very different. They had their own kind of hashtag, a very easy one, hashtag D&D movie, which then auto-generated a little kind of emoji of a mimic. If you don't know what the mimic is, you have to go and see the film and enjoy what that is. But it all began once, as in the official kind of endeavors outside of the media covering the making of, it all began really for all of us internationally on 21st of April, 2022, with the title announcement. So it was a very, very short video whereby, you had a bit of music and a bit of ambience, and the Dungeons and Dragons official logo appeared, and then the title, Honor Among Thieves, appeared. Something that we've seen done with Rings of Power and a few other TV series. And the kind of caption, if you will, was "Our campaign begins." And I thought it was lovely because, of course, that's what the campaign is going to be all about. You could either see it as a D&D campaign, or as a marketing campaign, which I thought was just a lovely little touch.
No, that's that. I mean, again, that's I probably haven't even thought of a D&D campaign until just then, but that's what we used to call them. The dungeon master who runs the game creates a campaign, doesn't it? It's Rick Nettleton's campaign. Yeah, love it. That's a fabulous play on words, Pascal.
No problem. So then you can tell us about the next teaser that came up a bit later.
Yeah, now this was July, the 21st of July, 2022, and teaser poster, very, very stylish. Basically, you've got this dragon motif, fire-breathing dragon motif, and then the shadows, the sort of silhouettes of the five protagonists, the five thieves, I guess, and that's it pretty much. The names of the stars. Obviously, Chris Pine is the one that everybody will recognise as the guy who played Jim Kirk in the Star Trek revival films, but of course Hugh Grant's in this as well. Now, this I was going to say you always associate Hugh Grant in either one of two roles, don't you? He's either the sort of romantic rom-com type, Four Weddings and a Funeral, or Notting Hill, or Love Actually, that sort of nice bloke gets the girl sort of thing. Or more recently, he started playing very quite scarily villains, isn't he? And his villain acting is actually quite scary. And I know he was in Paddington as a villain as well. So I'm absolutely intrigued to see what he's going to be like in this. But yeah, that poster is very striking, and I would have that on my wall.
Absolutely, and you have the silhouettes, of the main characters. And now fans obviously was saying, well, which one is which? Is Chris Pine this one and this one? But they didn't have to wait too long, because the same day, the first official trailer came out, which I must have watched about 50 times. But I have to say, I did raise an eyebrow, and I was a bit concerned back to this idea of, please don't mess it up, for the fourth time with the use of the Led Zeppelin sound music, a whole lot of love. What do you make of the inclusion of that particular song?
Oh, I don't know. I've never really been a massive Led Zeppelin fan, to be perfectly honest, apart from Stairway to Heaven, which I guess everybody loves. I always think that music has to fit. I only tend to get cross in films when they use music that's anachronistic. So, for example, if you set a film in the 1960s, you can't play 80s music in the film. Now, if you're in a fantasy setting like this, in my head, you should probably not be using any sort of contemporary music because it would never have played out in that world. But I can see, music makes the world go round. I love music to death, and I probably felt a little bit against this because of Led Zeppelin, and I'm not a Led Zeppelin fan. But I can see that it would appeal to some people. But I think you've got to be very, very careful when you put music into a film like this that is contemporary, when this film isn't really about the world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was hoping for, heroic fantasy soundtrack. I wanted to be taken to the world as I felt with Lord of the Rings and many others. With a few rewatching, of course, studying the marketing campaign, I said, well, maybe that's when they decided to agree that they had to play to two audiences, the D&D fans and the general public.
Yeah.
I think when you watch it with the montage, the action scene, and the one-liners and so on, I kind of warmed to it. But also, I'm now realizing this may be a little Easter egg about a secondary storyline about Chris Pine's character seeking love. So there could be a lot of things there, but I thought it was a brave decision. Because I was even thinking, well, are they trying to suggest that? Because one thing we know from interviews that the creators have been very respectful of the game, both from its origin all the way to its current iteration. I was thinking, well, if you were a player when it first was launched by TSR in the 70s, perhaps it would have been the music playing in the background in your bedroom, as you were saying, when you're playing with your mates. But take us on to the second poster reveal, please.
Well, the second poster is obviously you get to see the characters.
Wow.
This is a theme that for me is developing over doing more and more of these film marketing segments. I'm really liking campaigns like this where there's an ensemble cast and you get that contrast between a poster like this which features them all. So obviously we've got all the actors we spoke about before in costume, and it's beautiful colours, and there's images of the worlds in the background as well. Fantastic, absolutely gorgeous. But also like the ability that they can then move on to do individual character posters and individual character spots. And we've seen that so many times in film marketing now, Pascal. Death on the Nile, Lord of the Rings. It's just a great way of marketing and a great way of focusing in on individuals and ensembles at the same time. So that second poster, again, absolutely gorgeous, completely different to the teaser. It's like the teaser almost explodes into this one, doesn't it?
And I mean, you're right. And there's so much detail that the fan could study, particularly the lower third with the town. Where is it? Is it part of the official storyline? And it is interesting. This is the artwork that is used currently on the French website. Then we had to be a little patient, as fans, because they kept teasing more content. But we had access on the 5th of December to a 2-minute featurette, which is almost thinking, well, we've given people a lot of information, a lot of teaser to avoid almost misunderstanding and to control, rumors. Let's share a bit more about what's been driving us, how we've approached the film and so on. And I think that was very wise to do so, where the actors and the creators could talk to camera. And that was pretty much on the same day as well. That's interesting. I've noticed now they do a poster and a video reveal on the same day. That's what they seem to have done so far.
Yeah. And then the next one is another character poster with all the characters there. Interestingly enough, Chris Pine is playing a lyre or an old-fashioned guitar. He actually looks a bit like he could be in Led Zeppelin, doesn't he? So maybe that's the link there. Actually, just thinking back again, quite a lot of 70s prog rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Genesis, in their early days, their songs were very much inspired by fantasy. They were very
That's
much,
the case indeed.
by Tolkien and stuff. So maybe there's a link there. I don't know.
It's a beautiful one that was used for the international website. And what is interesting, another kind of D&D in-joke, the bard, as a class, was always the one that people hated playing because it was so hard to play.
Yeah.
Because you needed to know enough about music and poetry to really give the character a justice. And I do believe that the bard as a class was given like a new lease of life thanks to people like Critical Role and the others who played it well, and it was very amusing. But I think it's interesting that Chris Pine who's I think the lead character with regard to the band of thieves. He didn't go for the fighter, didn't go for the paladin, those. He went for the bard. So I think we're going to see a lot of humor in this, because ultimately, apart from charisma and good communication skill, he can't fight, but I'm able to talk his way out of problems.
Pascal, there's just so much stuff here. I know you, as you said, you really enjoyed it, and you went down a rabbit hole digging out all these fabulous visuals. So tell me, we probably haven't got time to go through each one individually, but tell me in a nutshell what you think about all of this stuff that you've discovered.
So to me, it was back to this idea of appeasing the D&D fans and appealing to a wider audience. But we didn't know. And so they carried on with the character reveal, they carried on with the trailers and so on. But the date that really transformed the I suppose, the appeal was the 10th of March, when the world premiere took place at the South by Southwest Film Festival. And the critics went wild, the fans went wild. I could breathe again, because I realize now that we had an amazing movie. And since the 10th of March, it's never stopped now. And they carried on sharing a bit more in terms of what they've done. But more importantly, of course, they had the premieres both in Paris, which was 2 days ago, and London was yesterday. And I guess they're going to have a premiere in the US very, very soon. So listen, what I think we should do now from a learning point of view is talk about how they split the campaign then between the gamers and the non-gamers. So as a summary, in terms of how they got the gamers excited, we would expect that they would do that. It was a year ago, so they're still not revealed. They had a tavern opened at the San Diego Comic-Con. Of course you would, because another D&D in-joke, most adventurers met in a tavern at the start of the game. They had AR/VR filters, for mobile phone. People could pretend to be a paladin. They could pretend to be a barbarian or a bard if they just do so. Of course, they had book prequels, because that is something that we've seen a lot, and there is a great book reading community around D&D. They had live Q&As full of humor and so on. But the one that, of course, they had to do, they released the official character sheets on the D&D Beyond official website. So if you wanted to either meet the characters of the movie as NPCs or play them, you could download the official character sheets and have their scores and have a game. And in a way, that's probably the one thing that they haven't done as part of this campaign for the gamers. They haven't released an official, if you like, scenario that people can play. And they use a number of influences, of course, throughout, from Critical Role to the nerdies to Screen Rant and so on as well. So the gamers were well looked after, and that was about appeasing them. What did they do, Roger, to attract the general public?
I guess, Pascal, the campaign to the public just focuses more in on the story, more in on the characters, more in on the action, more in on the humours. Obviously, in Super Bowl back in February, there was a 30-second teaser, very exciting, and that's obviously went out to the whole world, massive audience there. But it's the usual sort of let's start working with people. So you've got the early screenings for Amazon Prime US subscribers, going to certain cinemas to see the film. We've got lots of stuff going on Twitter. But the thing that I just wanted to focus on here, and you very kindly, it was a lovely surprise last Saturday to get an email with a link to actually go and see this film. And Trisha and I are going to see Dungeons & Dragons tomorrow, courtesy of yourself. So thank you very much for that. And I'll report back on the next episode what we actually think of the film. But this was in conjunction with 𝗵𝗲, which is a UK charity which I know you're very supportive of, and it's a special screening of the film for that charity. So you just tell me a little bit more about how that works.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, to begin with, yeah, all proceeds will go to 𝗵𝗲, who are essentially a charity, independent charity. Patrons are Nick Frost as well as Simon Pegg, and they build and manage cinemas within hospitals with the conviction, which I totally agree, that the world of cinema, movie magic, will make patients, families, and actually staff feel better and recuperate better. And someone who spent a year and a half in the hospital when I was younger with cancer, and we had a TV in our room, which made a whole world of difference. I would assure you, 𝗵𝗲 is very important to me. So whilst I have to wait till the 12th of April, being in France, premieres such as this one with many other brands and charities are happening as we speak. And yeah, I'm so pleased that you get to see it tomorrow.
And there's a lot of teasing going on still, isn't there? Even though the film's out, they teased the closing credits song, "Wings of Time." Again, that's quite interesting. I love that some other recognisable UK comedians and stars are teasing the film as well. I love this one. Sue Perkins records Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves audio description, and she says, "I got very lucky with this dice roll." And again, it's that whole point of campaign, isn't it? And the subtle that works really nicely, because the public wouldn't probably catch on what that means, but here we're saying, oh, it's all about the dice, it's all about D6, D20 and all of that sort of thing. So even with the public campaign focusing, I'm thinking much more on the fact that this is an action movie, this is a fun movie, this is a fantasy movie, but it's got fabulous locations, it's got fabulous characters. It's even the public campaigner still has these little hints that it's based upon the game that we loved from the 1980s.
And this amount of respect and love for the game is so apparent. And I think generally you don't have to have played D&D to be able to enjoy this as a family, as a group of friends, and so on. Because literally, I think the acting is going to be spot on. There's going to be you're going to laugh all the way through as if you were around the table. But also, many people have praised the practical special effects. So there's a lot of practical special effects. The decor. I mean, every so often I have to say I've recognised Annie Castle, so that takes me out of the world a little bit. But that's fine. It's very, very brief. And I think there's going to be surprises, because whilst, with the marketing campaign, the trailers have revealed a hell of a lot, I reckon there's still plenty for people to enjoy. So, for me, when we created Two Geeks and Marketing podcast all those years ago now, and we wanted to bring the 80s and popular culture into the world of marketing and tech and games and movies, but to be in a position now to talk about a D&D movie, that's quite special.
Yeah, it is. And finally, I think I just noticed that, we've got the likes of Mr. Beast promoting this on his YouTube channel. And, we know that Mr. Beast I think he's the biggest YouTuber in the world now. He's got multiple millions of followers. I've not looked at his follow account for a while, but I think the last time I looked at it was north of 12 million. So he is a genuine influencer. So he will, if they're using him to promote the film, and he's been doing some pranks hosted by Mr. Beast. And I also quite like the fact that he's called Mr. Beast, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a few beasts in the film as well. And there's a tie-in with Fortnite as well.
Yes.
Actually, I have to say there was an update to Fortnite went through yesterday, but I've not played it yet today. So it'll be interesting to see whether there's any content appeared in the latest update there. So yeah, I am looking forward to seeing this, both from the point of view. Or I think this is interesting that we've looked at this from the point of view of the fans, but also the public. I'm going to see this film as both tomorrow.
Wow!
So isn't that what will probably happen to you as well? Because there will be the old 1980s gamer part of Pascal Fintoni that wants to enjoy this film with that hat on. I played this game when I was growing up. I still play this game now in the modern world. But you'll also just want to go to the cinema as an as a normal person, if that doesn't sound too insulting, and be entertained purely by a good film. So I think that both of us are going to go to the cinema in two guises, as a D&D player and as a member of the public, which is exactly how this marketing campaign has been framed.
Superb. Thank you very much, Roger.
Well, that was another absolutely action-packed episode. We've covered so much ground today and so much really good content. I've really enjoyed going through that, and as we've said, can't wait to see that film tomorrow, and I will report back. Thank you everybody for watching Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, episode 97. Thank you also if you were listening to the show. We really do appreciate it. We'd love your feedback as well, and you can leave us feedback by putting a comment on the YouTube channel. You can talk to us on Twitter. You can even leave us a message on SpeakPipe. So until the next episode, thank you all so much once again. Go out there, make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.